This event is sponsored by Miro. Miro is the online whiteboard platform where product teams can work together effectively. If you don't know where to start, it's packed with over 50 templates for product teams. Whether you need a Kanban, mind map, retrospective, product roadmap, or user story map, we've got you covered. Try it for free.
Hello world, my name is Monica and I'm going to be talking about building platforms in large companies. Let me start the presentation. Excellent. So just a few definitions. When I talk about platforms, I'm really talking about the foundational infrastructure on which other vertical experiences are built. So in a lot of companies, you would have teams that are focused on that kind of horizontal view. And then you'd have teams that are focused on very specific vertical product experiences. This talk is about building as a PM for those horizontal platforms. A little about myself. I majored in computer science and I went on to get an MBA. So that's very, very common for product managers that I've seen. I started out as a software engineer building high frequency trading platforms at a bank. And that's where I really got interested in platform work and the power of using the power to use platforms to really shape a company's product. Some other platform experience I've had is building machine learning stacks, and I was part of ads at Facebook, and I'm currently on a platform team at Google. At this point, I should mention that I am speaking from my perspective, so I'm not speaking on behalf of any of my employers. These are my thoughts and my best practices, and I'm curious to hear from other people. So before I jump into some of the best practices in developing platforms, I want to start by making the case for why platform teams. The first reason that I really have enjoyed being part of platform teams is that they offer broad impact across your company's product portfolio. So as I mentioned earlier, you're building really the horizontal infrastructure on which vertical experiences are then implemented. And so it's an opportunity for you when you make a change to really impact a lot of different experiences across the company. Another case for platform teams is really a lot of the problems that you're solving involve thinking about the disparate vertical needs and understanding how to distill those needs into a common scalable component. So if you're the kind of person that likes to take a look at all of the different needs and come up with like what the commonality is and solve for that commonality, then PMing a platform could be quite exciting. Now, I should mention one perhaps downside to building platforms is it involves a lot of coordination. And the result of that is making changes can take more time than if you were doing a very scoped vertical experience. And the reason for this is because a lot of teams are depending on your product. Whenever you need to make changes, it is wise to make sure you're coordinating with these teams so that you don't leave anybody flat-footed when you release a change. Enough of my preaching. Now I'll go into some best practices for building platforms. The first best practice and advice I'd give is to feel very comfortable being bold and proactive with the perspective for your platform. Vertical teams are going to be looking to you to understand why they should build on top of your platform and the benefits and value your platform give to the overall product space. And so one of the things to do is to have guiding principles for what components the platform builds versus what components can be built independently inside of different verticals. And the reason why you want to be very proactive and bold with your guiding principles is it also gives a sense of fairness to the people, to your partners. And by partners here, I mean your vertical team counterparts. If you have solid guiding principles that you use to evaluate when a partner can build with your platform versus when not, it tends to release friction that could come from a negotiation. The second point here is to publish an agreed upon SLA to partners. Especially as a PM, you often would get a lot of requests coming in. And so if you have an agreed upon SLA, it helps your partners have a better understanding for when they can see some of the changes that they're dependent on. And then last, but really certainly not least, is really taking that strategic view to what you're building. A lot of platforms, like I mentioned, requires a ton of coordination, has a ton of partners that are dependent on your infrastructure. And so it's important for you to constantly be thinking in multiples of years, in fact, in many cases, so that it's clear to people where you're going and so that your partners can build in lockstep. And I'll talk more about what building in lockstep could look like very practically. So share guiding principles, make sure you have an SLA that's well published, and you need to be very clear on the strategic vision for the platform. Second one, you need to build an understanding of the end user. So a lot of times when you're building infrastructure, there tends to be one hop between you and the end user. And yet it is extremely crucial for you to have empathy for those end users. One of the reasons being, again, you're taking requests from different vertical teams, but ultimately you're building for an end user. And so you want to help ensure things like consistency. You want to help make sure that whatever you're building, even when you're addressing one immediate vertical need, can be extensible to address all of the end users' needs pertaining to what you're building. And so it's really important for you to be dogfooding the experiences on your vertical teams, for you to be intimately aware of what your end users are trying to do, so that you're building for those people in mind. And the second point here is around trends and changes in the vertical product areas. So for me, I very much like to keep in touch with what's going on in the external space. Again, because you're building horizontally, you need to have a strategic vision, and your strategic vision will be more powerful when you're aware of where the space is going. You kind of have a good sense of what the user's needs are today, but where it could evolve to, and you're therefore building accordingly. So really, like, even though you're building an infrastructure or what some people might even call backend, you need to make sure you're very much in touch with the user experience. I cannot emphasize this enough. Number 3, all partnerships are not created equal. And here, what I mean is you will have a number of partners, and there's often pressure to address all of the needs that are coming in. But it's important for you to prioritize. And oftentimes, you want to prioritize the partnerships that bring highest value to your platform goals and ultimately the company's goals. So if you have a brand new, for example, if you have a brand new vertical, it's very exciting because they're trying to get a number of things done. They come to you and seek your help in using the platform. You really need to step back and think, like, does it make sense for me to pivot resources to these needs, or are those needs better served elsewhere? And so prioritization is really what I'm emphasizing here. You don't need to try to treat everybody uniformly, but instead you want to prioritize the limited resources you have to address the needs that are most crucial to your platform strategy and then also ultimately the company strategy. And this is where doing prioritization will then lead you to some lower priority requests and needs. And there you should feel comfortable really suggesting to teams to use out of the box components, because again, you're going to feel a lot of pressure to build to address bespoke needs. But ultimately, because you're a platform, you're really trying to build components that can be reused, that are extensible, and that are not focused on any one specific bespoke need. 4, joint roadmap goals. Yes. So earlier I talked about the fact that you want to be moving in lockstep. And what I mean by this is, let's say you have a vertical partner team that needs you to build a component, your team to build a component. Well, you want to make sure that you're building at a pace that's actually aligned with that team. Because if you take all your resources and build the component and your vertical partner is not ready, then you're sitting there with a component that's not ready for you, that's not ready to be used. However, the other side to this is if you're delayed and there's a team that's dependent on you, then you end up being the bottleneck. And you do not want to be the bottleneck naturally, because the long-term ramification of if you're of constantly being a bottleneck is teams will become more incentivized to kind of run amok and build for their specific needs. And so it's really important to work with teams on joint roadmaps where you're kind of sequencing your timing appropriately. And the second reason for joint roadmaps is commitment to the plan. So I myself have had a lot of conversations where I will talk to a partner that has a specific need, and I naturally see my team meeting that need. But if we don't put it down on the roadmap, you can easily lose sight of that. It's also a way to signal commitment. By very publicly having joint goals, then you can hold each other accountable, and you can ensure that all through your planning, you do have your eyes on the commitments that you've made. So very important to use the joint roadmaps as kind of a forcing function to actually build in tandem with your vertical counterparts. And then the last best practice I'm going to talk about is building components versus launching in one fell swoop. One of the things about platforms is you're often taking a strategic lens. You know, you're looking very broadly and you're trying to build components that address common needs. The temptation then can be to come up with a very grand plan that's very strategic, but that will take multiple cycles to actually release. However, a VP friend of mine gave me very sound advice early on, which is as a PM, you really build credibility by launching and having good launches frequently. So even though you're building a platform, even though you're trying to take a horizontal view, it's extremely important to remain disciplined in componentizing what you want to build so that you're actually releasing consistently versus waiting for that one fell swoop kind of waterfall model. Now, I'm going to be honest, quick wins I have seen tend to be harder on platforms than on vertical teams. And by that, I mean the speed of iteration. When you're a platform team, even the smallest changes, you want to make sure that all your partners are well aware and have time to adjust to those changes. And so you may not move as quickly as your vertical counterparts. But if you're able to take that strategic vision and come up with kind of lockstep components that you need to build, it can help alleviate that issue of having very long cycles. And so again, just to recap, it's really important to think in terms of MVPs and to build incrementally and really force yourself, even though you're taking that very strategic broad view, to still find ways to build incrementally. That will allow you to get some of the benefits that come with the iterative cycle where you can make changes and you can learn. So that's a nutshell of best practices. I hope you found this useful. I am constantly learning in this space and would love to hear any questions or additional best practices that you may have if you're in this space. Thank you and bye.